You know how I read things out of order? It's because of things like this. I read The Shadow Rising in February, March of this year, and then I read Dune later on in May. And while reading Dune, I was like, wow, these Fremen guys sure are similar to the Aiel from the Wheel of Time. Whoops. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sandbox. We are continuing on with our Wheel of Time reviews today with book number 4, The Shadow Rising. It had been a while for me since I'd read and reviewed a Wheel of Time book, but I wanted to wait until the mood hit me because I knew going into this one that it was a fan favorite, the number one pick for many within the fan base. And luckily it didn't take long after reading book 3, The Dragon Reborn, for the mood to strike me once again, but I've been sitting on this review for a while, mainly because this was just a challenging read for me, and one that I felt I really needed to sit on before I started to talk about it. This is the first time for me where the series has really felt like an epic, arcs coming together and offering new paths and directions for our characters, and a lot of the world building starting to make more sense and become more whole. But is it worth the read? Well, we are going to dive into my spoiler-free thoughts today to hopefully answer that question for you. But short answer, if you enjoyed the first 3, I feel like you're gonna like this one and want to continue on. But if not, this book might be a good stopping place, whether you stop before it or after reading it. At least that's what my die-hard Wheelie fans have told me.
Yeah, sure.
But anyways, that's enough of an introduction. Let's get into the review. Starting off with the writing, as I like to do, I have to say, I think this is the strongest that Jordan has been yet within the series. There's this really interesting, mysterious tone with Rand and his politicking early on, and as the story progresses, it never loses this darker and more serious voice. The prose or style is more or less the same, but again, it does feel like Jordan is refining his technical skill with each new installment. The themes within this book also feel a bit more clear and unique than the past 3. The series has really been tackling power and self-identity and trust, and while this one does dial those up to 11 and also has this cohesive through line revolving around truth and how it touches every corner of the world, every aspect of this story. Seeing how truth travels and is distorted with each village our characters pass through, and how our characters must struggle with their own challenge regarding certain truths that are pertinent to them. It all adds to this mysterious tone and this growing tension present within the series. But as for the pacing, I think this is easily the weakest of the first 4, and it's the only aspect that affected my reading experience negatively. There are some really epic moments in here that provide the first big moments of payoff for the first leg of this series, but the time and investment it takes to get there, I don't think were worth it personally. There are parts spent in the Aiel Waste that I found to move at a snail's pace and were oftentimes confusing with the layered world building going on, but what's worse is that right when Jordan grabs me, right when the story starts to get good, he switches POV for 6 to 7 chapters with a new group of characters before continuing on with that rotation.
Not a great plan.
On one hand, it does help to dissipate the confusion and make the world building feel more organic and intimate, but on the other hand, it makes for a frustrating read, which is quite in line with my previous experiences with Jordan's writing. But moving on to the story, where does this novel take us? What journeys are we witnessing here? Well, to avoid spoilers as much as possible, this one picks up, I believe, briefly after book 3, with Rand accepting that he is indeed the Dragon Reborn and starting to make his first political moves, as well as continuing on with self-fulfilling the prophecies regarding himself. Meanwhile, the girls are off on their own adventures yet again, honing in on their skills and continuing their crusade against the Black Ajah. And meanwhile, Perrin is off on his own, going back to the Two Rivers to defend his people. That's as much as I'm willing to say without diving too heavily into spoilers, but truth be told, when I read the blurb on the back of the book, I wasn't too excited for this one. It seemed like a natural continuation of the story, but nothing stood out to me as epic. But the things that happen within this installment, the actual events that take place, especially when you weed out the fluff and ignore the word count, this is the first time for me personally where this series has really felt like high epic fantasy. This is Jordan going off the rails, further establishing himself and his world, and making it known that this is not just some cheap copy of The Lord of the Rings.
This is the real deal.
The stakes feel as high as ever, and the action, both the battles themselves and the writing for the scenes, gets a huge improvement here. Honestly, this book feels like one huge and long payoff for having read the first 3 novels. It all just feels so much realer now, like the pieces have been set in place, the world has been established, and so now our characters must get moving on both their individual quests and their shared journeys. Now, all that said, I do think this one ran a bit too long. It's almost at Stormlight Archive length, but for me, it wasn't deserving of that length, at least not on the first read-through. I feel like 10% less would have made the final product 10% better, but it's also entirely possible that on a second read-through, I enjoy it more and value the extra time with these characters. But let's move on to the characters themselves, as they are what make this story work in the first place. And what's interesting here is I could summarize this entire book simply by going through each relationship. I feel like Jordan has really nailed character relationships from romance to mere acquaintances. The story, the world, both feel alive and authentic because of these characters and the friends and enemies they make along the way. There's still a bit of that lingering and annoying teenage romance drama, but it's never bothered me nearly on the same level as it has for some very vocal readers out there. And considering that it's already been established up to this point, I thought it worked really well here. It's not just something present within this series, it's an actual aspect of the story, something that drives our characters' motivations and the actions they take, which I personally really appreciate. As for the villains, you can expect more Forsaken here as they continue to make their moves, especially political ones. It's becoming more apparent what their angle is as they begin to crawl out of the shadows. But for me, they are not what drives up the villain aspect compared to previous books. There are a lot of new and old characters who take up the mantle of villain here, from Aiel challengers to competing factions within the Aes Sedai. And each one drives that sense of urgency and makes the hero's struggles more relatable and intense. And as for the heroes, they're all great. Rand is starting to become the leader he needs to be, and he certainly has a plethora of hurdles that he has to navigate in this one. The girls are continually interesting for me as well as they become more comfortable with their powers and place in the world. And Matt might just be the most logical thinking character in all of fantasy.
What are you on about?
Oh, come on, man. Aes Sedai, White Tower, one of us being the Dragon Reborn. It's a bloody joke.
But Perrin is the real highlight here. He is the heart and soul of this book, and his character arc is easily the most captivating piece of this novel, and probably the entire series up to this point. The actions he takes, his relationships, his thoughts and expectations, the things that happen to him, and the things he must do, all of it was perfectly engaging and addicting. When Perrin was on the page, I was clutching my book and reading vigorously. Honestly, I'm excited to see where things go and to see if Jordan can top this. I know that the slog is coming, so I'm trying to temper my expectations, but yeah, my excitement for the next novel continues. But it's time to start wrapping things up with the setting, especially the world building components going on here. We get a huge look into the Aiel Waste, as well as some of their big cities, religious dwellings, and their culture. We get probably the most background we've ever gotten on a single people within this world, with the Aiel and their history. And I joked about it before, but the Aiel definitely have some striking similarities with the Fremen from Dune, both being sand or desert dwelling people who come with distinct physical traits and are some of the best fighters within their world. It's obvious to me that Jordan was inspired by Herbert and the world of Arrakis for this part, but again, Jordan finds ways to make them unique, to make them stand out and feel like a completely fresh idea. Aside from the Aiel Waste, we do get another more thorough look at the two rivers, as well as a new water-adjacent city with Tanchico. And while I was quite fascinated by Tanchico's culture, I did find it to be a bit sparse, so I'm hoping we get to see this city be fleshed out a bit more later on. Jordan sets up some very interesting ideas with Tanchico and with some of our characters, but I found it all to be background noise rather than a driving force of that part of the story. But even so, even if we never see Tanchico again, it all gave me more confidence within Jordan's writing and especially his world building. Overall, the setting here feels unique. It feels like a step in the right direction as it pays off some of our initial investment as readers, while also setting up more cool things to come. All in all, this was a worthwhile read for me, but its level of reward or satisfaction is still hindered by its length and the speed of its pacing. It's a slow burn, but after sitting on this one and thinking it over, it's become clear that its burn has left its mark on me, and I think it's here to stay. I am going to give this one another 8.5 out of 10. I think it's certainly possible that after a reread way down the line that it goes up and secures that 9 that I was expecting, but in all truth, I was a bit underwhelmed after all the hype that this book receives. It's well deserving on one hand, but on the other, I would like to be the voice that tempers those high expectations, because not everyone is looking forward to 400,000 word books, especially ones that come with less epic moments and payoffs than something like A Game of Thrones or the Stormlight Archive. This one feels more raw and does have more of that high epic fantasy-ness that I've been craving compared to the first 3, but looking at the investment required, I think this one is still on par with The Great Hunt and perhaps The Dragon Reborn as well. But let me know your thoughts on The Shadow Rising down below in the comments, as well as your thoughts on the series overall up to this point. If you have read the series, let me know. Should I continue? Do you think I will enjoy the next few installments? Should I be excited? Or do you think that this is as good as it gets and I should just put the series down and focus my attention on others? Personally, I think that I can find the good in this series easier than others, though I am a bit put off by that upcoming slog I keep hearing about. But then again, Sanderson did help to finish this series, and I really want to see this thing through, so hey, if it takes a few years, it takes a few years. And in our hearts, we can always remember one simple fact. This will always be better than the Amazon Prime series. Yikes. If you enjoyed the video, let me know by hitting that like button and sharing this with another fantasy fanatic, and let me know down in the comments what else you would like to see me read and cover here. But as for now, that's it from me. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will see you all next time.